Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the third installment of COPán Tae, a series of lunchtime chats hosted by Axis Green Arts in the context of COP26. So the topic we have today is Young Radicals, are fringe and freelance artists answering the call already? And we are joined by Susan Kennelly, Katie O'Halloran and Ceara Carney. So I'm really excited to hear you guys' thoughts on this discussion. But just to let anyone tuning in know that we have Kate and Clodagh working, Kate and Clodagh working behind the scenes. So if you have any questions or if there's any links to bits, they'll be going in the Facebook comments. But yeah, so if we start off, I was wondering if the three of you could give a quick little introduction to yourselves, give us a sense of what you do, the kind of work you make, and that sort of thing. So Susan, why don't we start with you?
Sure, thank you. So my name is Susan Kennelly. I'm the marketing manager at Dublin Fringe Festival since May 2020. So I've only ever known Dublin Fringe in a pandemic, which is very strange, but you know, my normal. And before that, I worked in London for Freeze Art Fair and Acute Art, which made VR and AR artworks. So coming to a conversation about, you know, climate action from a side of the art, which is incredibly commercial and incredibly kind of, I would say, carbon dense, is quite interesting. But I come from a very administrative kind of side and not a practice-based side to the conversation. So yeah, delighted to kind of speak with Katie and Ceara from their perspectives.
Cool, thanks so much. Ceara, would you like to chat about yourself to us?
Sure, I'm an actor, but I've been an activist kind of organising protests and participating in protests with a couple of different groups, but mainly Extinction Rebellion and Animal Rebellion since April 2019. And I also have a podcast on climate change and like positive steps that we can take for eco-friendly living. But yeah, acting and theatre is what I mainly do.
Cool, amazing. And last but not least, Katie, could you give us a quick introduction?
Yeah, I'm Katie. I'm originally from Minneapolis, Minnesota. I started a theater company called Pale Blue Dot back home, and it's an eco-feminist, zero-waste theater company. So we're really focused on producing theater without producing any material waste, and then also sort of investigating the ways in which we could be eco-conscious conceptually. And I moved here in 2019. So I've been living in Dublin since 2019 and did the directing course at the Lear and been living here ever since.
Great, cool. So a whole range of perspectives. Katie, I was wondering if first I could come to you and ask kind of what eco-theatre or sustainable theatre or whatever you want to call it kind of is to you, and if maybe you could give some sort of practical examples of what that looks like in your work.
Yeah, so I just touched on this a little bit, and Clodagh and I were actually having a conversation about this last night, but something that I think I'm focusing on more now as a director, and having been away from Pale Blue Dot for a while now, just having been through an academic year and trying to set up a career in a new country. Something that I think a lot about is how to be eco-conscious conceptually, or in terms of, I think what's discussed a lot is the production side of things, is what eco-theater looks like in terms of production. And design, but I think as well, what's interesting to me is how we can pull out themes that are linked to ecofeminism or linked to even something like recycling. And you see a prop on stage that's used to become 8 million things, as opposed to theater that is quite literal and prescriptive and maybe a bit more of a spectacle. I think to me, eco-theater is an opportunity to present theater that engages imagination a little bit more and fosters community, and I mean, of course, that hopefully is not producing the same amount of waste that standard commercial theatre produces. But I think as well, it's about the ideas that people walk away with after having seen an eco theatre show, to realize how much your brain and imagination can work while watching a show that asks that you do so, and to realize I suppose like the joy and the beauty in that is what I'm really interested in, because I think people do enjoy that kind of work. And then I suppose from there, seeing how we can apply that kind of thinking to our day-to-day lives, hopefully living a more conscious way and a more sustainable way.
Yeah, it's really nice to hear a much kind of broader and more open definition of eco-theatre, because I think you're right. Sometimes people can get quite kind of specific about like you have to be doing these things, or you have to be exploring like this issue for it to be considered in that kind of sphere. But I think it's a really nice way of putting it, that it's a much more kind of open invitation to think about things differently, I suppose. And Susan, I was wondering from your perspective with Dublin Fringe, if you feel you've noticed like an increase in any work that kind of takes more of that approach, whether it is kind of practically in terms of their process, or if it's kind of climate related themes coming through.
Definitely, I think over the course of the pandemic and kind of just the increase in kind of climate awareness through kind of dramatic environmental events that have been occurring, and also not having the full scale in-person festival allowed people to kind of lean into those more non-traditional, unconventional type of projects, which I think is where kind of climate action and environment-based work can kind of live in an alternative way, as in, Katie, when you say kind of non-prescriptive and that kind of the conscious way of kind of not needing to do things in a traditional mode. And that's where I think from my perspective with working with Dublin Fringe, that's where we've seen kind of environmentally minded work. And particularly in 2020, there was 1,000 Miniature Meadows from Luke Casterly and Shannon May Breen, which was really well received from audiences because it came to you in the post. It was a parcel of seeds that you could then go to a place of your choosing, which is kind of, you know, a scrubland or an unloved piece of area in your location, and just that kind of engagement through alternative experiences really seemed to animate audiences, which I thought was a lovely opportunity to kind of join the dots in that kind of way from audiences to artists, not necessarily in a theatre environment with all of the bells and whistles that's kind of required for a production in a theatre.
Yeah, because that was one of the amazing things, because if I remember correctly, I think Dublin Fringe is one of the few kind of festivals or productions to actually kind of plow on in 2020 and get stuff up. And I suppose, do you feel that then, I mean, it sounds like that created a really positive response, and you feel like maybe you'll take kind of elements of the ways that you produced work during that time forward into future Fringe programs?
Definitely, that's from a programming side of things that we definitely won't leave in the past, and it's trying to imagine then and create that flexibility and kind of that adaptability that we had moving forward, and reaching as broad an audience as possible is always the priority. From a marketing perspective, it was how do you reach people when the traditional modes of like on street advertising and stuff like that, and that brings in a whole other conversation about, you know, printed physical materials and trying to lean away from those traditional elements. But the learnings of how to reach an audience when the physical connection is removed will definitely be learned, but I have some conflicts around that I'm kind of wrestling with, which I think the digital space is a great opportunity, but it's also unknown in terms of its resource use. And I think there's a lot of research and kind of just a lot of thinking that needs to happen around that lean into digital that kind of happened during the pandemic, and just what implications that has in terms of our carbon use.
Yeah, no, I think you're so right. It's definitely not like a complete shift. I think it's kind of a dialogue between the two, both of, you know, because everyone loves in-person things, whether that's marketing or shows themselves, but also, you know, like the digital also does have a carbon cost, as you're saying. So it's not just like, oh, that one's better than the other. It is kind of about, yeah, creating a conversation between the two. And then, yeah, with some of the shows you're talking about there, like 1,000 Miniature Meadows and that sort of thing, I think something that's really interesting about eco-theatre pieces is how they are often, you know, there's often kind of seeds of activism, pun was not intended, within them. And I know, Cara, you have a lot of experience both in performance and in activism. And I was wondering if you could talk a bit about whether you see any kind of crossover between the two, and what that looks like for you.
Yeah, so with like Extinction Rebellion is kind of their approach of like civil disobedience and protest is unique, a bit bonkers to some people. It's their kind of approach to protest is to be colourful and eye-catching and be theatrical, as well as I guess causing ruckus or like blockading something. But even then, there are so many media calls where with just some costume and a speech and some kind of flary performance, all of the media staff in Dublin will come, take photographs, record, and there might literally just be 3 people there. And then that message gets spread like really, really far. So as I was saying before we started, like I've got like a foot in the acting world and a foot in the activism world, but I've yet to actually marry them when it comes to like creating work. I'm lucky to, like, if I get a gig, if I get a play, whatever, like it could be some to devise a piece absolutely not related to the environment at all, and I'll work away on that. And then in my downtime, I'll like plan protests and stuff. So I've yet to actually make short films or theatre about it specifically. But I definitely see such value in bringing performance skills to the protest movement. It can backfire, because if you have like the faces of a protest working in the arts and being actors, you will get a comment on like the journal or something going, they're an actor, like they're hiring actors to, you know, to highlight an issue or something. But if you look, I have some photographs like I could share if you wanted, but I it's just so important, I think, to like break through the everyday messaging and the everyday news. And what does that is color and distraction. And, you know, because now we're just so overloaded with everything, information all the time, that to break through the media, but also even to get the media interested in you, you want to look interesting. So a lot of people, when you're walking, we might be in front of the doll dressed as mermaids, and people going, are you really stopping overfishing? And we're like, absolutely not at all. But you're looking at us because we look a bit bizarre, and you're reading our poster, and you're like, a load of people would like film us because we look so ridiculous or strange, and then they put that on their social media, and then people see the posters and stuff, and that message, like, you'd be using social media and news outlets is so powerful in raising more awareness of issues and getting more people then to join the movement. So yeah, using like performance and costume and like art, like theater and stuff, is so useful in the protest movement now, I think. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I think you're so right. There's so many skills from kind of performance and theatre in general that translate really nicely to protest. And it's also, I like what you're saying, that you can have these huge, like really flashy protests which catch people's eyes, but then also that there can be more simple ones where it's just a few people kind of doing something by themselves. Because you were involved recently in a protest that was similar to that, if I'm correct, right, of just dressing up and to defend a young climate activist.
Oh yeah, so yeah. There's actually been a couple of climate activists that have been arrested and charged recently, and we basically 2 have been brought. Only one has been brought to court so far. So when they're being brought to court, you'll hear more of a ruckus. But Orla Murphy is an activist who was 17 at the time they were arrested for basically they threw paint on a government building which was cleaned off within a couple of hours. But they were imprisoned for that, and then on their court date, it was still in the middle of lockdown. So we didn't want to be like, we're all about believing the science of climate change. So we can't then come out and be like, oh, let's have thousands of people on the streets when that's not safe to do, because we listen to the science. So partly because of lockdown as well, we literally just had, I dressed up as Lady Justice. We went for the Lady Justice theme, and we had someone in like a scary kind of mask to be like the government or the powers that be. And then as Orla spoke, like we had some singing and like just speaking. And I think when it can also help to have like trained singers or people who are comfortable doing public speaking at protests. And a lot of people in the arts are that, so that's where artists can be really useful to like share those skills with other activists, but also to like take the stand when needs be if people are too shy to do that. So we basically just made a bit of a theatrical, colourful display in front of the Criminal Court of Justice to highlight the injustice of Orla being like in prison. They spent 5 weeks in prison, while our government is complicit in ecocide and misses legally binding targets all the time. And we wanted to highlight like who shouldn't really be punished here, and like the whole system was kind of corrupt. So yeah, that's it. Like there was 2 people, and then a couple of people came to support with flags, and we got into papers because it looked cool.
Yeah, it sounds like a really creative way of getting around, you know, not being able to have loads of masses of people, just to do something really striking in that way. But you were kind of alluding to there something as well that I kind of wanted to throw out to any of you, in that saying that, you know, when you're walking along, people saying to you, are you really going to stop, you know, whatever, by doing that? And you're like, well, no, but it's something in itself. And that how we kind of navigate both in like theatre and activism and whatever, the knowledge that our impact, while it's important, is still relatively minimal, and something that I'm kind of struggling with myself as an eco-theatre practitioner now is, when does that become like greenwashing? When are you kind of overselling what it is that you're doing? And I don't know if any of you guys have any thoughts about how you've kind of navigated that in your own work too. Open to anyone.
The same with kind of any sort of activism or principled kind of action. You kind of just have to live it in an kind of holistic 360 way, and it kind of has to be within you, and it's not necessarily about the explicit action, it's more about the implicit. And I think it's just trying to consciously take an action and a decision that that you can stand by, and you know, you can only be accountable to yourself. But if you hold those principles close to yourself, then I think that's everything is a contradiction, and you know, it could be construed, you know, nothing is 100% infallible, which is the word I'm looking for, as in, you know, it's a contradiction and it's difficult and nothing's right, but inaction is inexcusable. So, you know, fear can't be a factor within it.
Yeah, totally. And I think I completely agree with you, and it is kind of rewarding as well to see that gradually more and more people are kind of taking on those principles and not kind of questioning why you'd even kind of begin that sort of activism quite so much anymore, which is why I was kind of interested to hear your perspective, Katie, on how the eco-theatre sustainable art movement has developed, because you founded Pale Blue Dot in 2016, is that right? Yeah, and there's been so much change since then, like, you know, so many more kind of networks and organizations developing, and just sort of generally in the public consciousness, people are much more aware of it now. So I was wondering if you could talk a bit about your kind of journey as an eco-feminist theatre maker.
Yeah, so you and I have talked about this a little bit, but just I think I founded the company because I felt like a hypocrite as someone who was kind of claiming this passion for environmental justice and also claiming a passion for theater. It felt hypocritical to love both of those things and to not be trying to fuse the two. And so I was still an undergrad when I founded the company, and I think it was quite easy to make eco theater, actually, because I didn't have a huge budget to be working with. I had my fellow actor friends who were also passionate about the environment and sustainability and equity. And a lot of us were working for free. I think from there, just because we were also passionate about what we were doing, we were able to, learn more about what eco theater is to each of us individually and collectively. But when we started, it was really, we had no idea what we were doing. We just wanted to make theater without throwing things in the bin at the end of the day. And I think what was great is we really got to learn a lot about site-specific work. We got to really create kind of communal experiences for ourselves and our audiences, because all of a sudden when you're going, okay, well, I don't want to go to H&M or American Apparel or whatever it is to get costume pieces, where do we go? And all of a sudden you're connecting with your community to go through people's closets or find out if anyone will donate pieces or props or whatever it is. Suddenly you have those people coming in to see your performances and then asking, actually, what's the significance of this place where you've set the production? And then they want to know more about the setting, if it's site specific, if it's outdoors, maybe there's a history there, or maybe that it's a setting that's in danger. And so that aspect of it was really excellent and really enriching, I think, for me as an artist, because I think community and ensemble really kind of dictate a lot of my work now. But I think I think the main thing I would say is that what I learned there, and just from working in that way, from working with no money, I learned just the significance of stories and how that is tied to environmental justice. When you think about the issues that we're talking about here, a lot of the time people care about things because they have a story linked to that place or to that type of animal or to water or whatever it is. And I think it was kind of those early days with Pale Blue Dot that I learned how to, I suppose, talk to people about significance of place and how significance of like protecting your home and what that means to individual audience members, and also just to chat with audience members. That's not something I don't think that happens enough in kind of commercial theater.
Yeah, and I think that's part of what you were saying about kind of having a wider ethos of kind of eco-consciousness in your work, that principle of community and togetherness, that's really nice when that like kind of feeds through into other things, like just getting to talk to your audience more and like having more of a sense of community.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think what you were saying there about like when you started out, that a lot of your work was just already eco because you didn't have enough money to like spend on loads of lights and that kind of thing. That I was wondering, kind of for all of you really, whether you feel like kind of art that is sustainable or environmentally conscious, whether that is always of inherently fringe art or smaller from smaller companies, or whether you think it is something that we kind of can see across art of all scales.
Probably seen it mostly in smaller theatre, in like unfunded artists making their own work. Like, because if you care so much about something, you're intrinsically motivated to do it. Like, the motivation comes within, as opposed from like money or whatever. Like, our big national stages and our big theatre companies are safe, and they can kind of put on like whatever they please, and it's great. They're like, they tackle like human rights a lot, and then they'll also show like traditional plays. But I think the people making new work, because climate change is not something that's really talked about in plays that we regurgitate, that we put new spins on, be it Shakespeare or Brian Friel or whatever. So all that work has to be made kind of new, and I think it is mostly like artists that are like, they might not have anything, like you might have no money or no space, and you're like, but I really care about this and I want to make it. So I've seen it definitely more, but I think it's the bigger funded players, I think, do have a responsibility. And I think theatres, like the Axis, are doing great things of having like a green arts kind of program, and everyone is like waking up to it now and bringing policies in and stuff. But then to actually fund the makers who put the message on the stage in various ways, from educational to hopeful or whatever, I think is important. So I think the bigger players, in my opinion, I think could definitely do more. But yeah, it's the unfunded guys that are doing it because it matters to them. Like, yeah.
Yeah. And that links nicely into a question that we have from Maeve from the Facebook. Maeve is asking, what's a piece of theatre, music, or any form of art that has really inspired you thinking about climate breakdown, whether that is a smaller scale piece or a larger one? Does anything jump to mind for any of you? If not, we can come back to the end.
I saw the question, so I had a little think about it. But there's so many things that people do, from like in art, from making jewelry with nature, or just painting things and photographing nature. I love those kind of things. But the actual first piece of theatre that jumped out of mind was something I saw years ago, that Donal O'Kelly put on, and I saw it in the New Theatre, like maybe 2013 or so. Ali Lu Fanula, I think it was called. But it was actually about the Shell to Sea, which was, for anyone watching who might not know, but there's like a big gas pipeline that Shell wanted to put through a community in Mayo, and there was ruckus over the environmental kind of side of it, but more so like the health of the people. And towards the end, there's a line where he repeats and repeats and repeats, as like the people of Ireland, of that's just the way it is, that's just the way it is. And he obviously was saying it doesn't have to be this way. And that is something that I always think about when it comes to like climate action or human rights or anything. And there's a sense of like acceptance and like, look, this is the way it's always been, this is the way it is. And it's like, no, it doesn't have to be that way. So that's actually something, even though it wasn't directly related to climate breakdown, I found that part really inspiring, and then brought it into college work and stuff, and was like, I like this. I've never met the guy. I mean, he did a great job. So that was what came to mind for me. I don't know if Katie or Susan have any ideas.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of dance, as someone who can't dance at all, and so I really love watching this Canadian company, a movement theater company, and they essentially just go into beautiful settings and make a piece of dance theater kind of with the landscape around them. I think that just sort of ties into, I'm from kind of a naturally beautiful place in Minnesota, and I think that kind of work is really meaningful to me, because you can see people's love for place, and I think kind of understanding that we move with the earth. And, you know, we talk a lot about we're killing the planet, we're killing the planet, we're killing ourselves is what we're doing. And I think we don't phrase it that way enough. And that work, that kind of moving with the earth and the elements, that sort of dance theater work, really always hits that point home for me.
Yeah, I think it's nice kind of seeing that it's not like that as we kind of generally grow to understand that climate and environment are really broad terms and they encompass us as humans and nature and so much more, that kind of then you don't view kind of climate-based theatre or whatever as such a specific kind of tiny sector of it. You see it's actually in so many things that we see and make, which is kind of really exciting, I think. Susan, I was hoping to ask you about kind of as a figure within the organisation of Dublin Fringe, how you feel organisations can support individuals or smaller companies kind of working to make their work more sustainable, or if you feel there's been any kind of interesting ways that individuals have had an impact on how the kind of organisation of Dublin Fringe has gone about those sort of green policies or ideas.
Yeah, I think transparency is key, and I think there's a lot of difficulties within it. I think time and resource is a major challenge, especially when you're a very small organisation and kind of particularly an organisation that has an event that runs for only 16 days, so it's very compressed in terms of timeline. But I think it's a dialogue and it's a two-way relationship, and what I think where the opportunity lies is working with artists who feel very strongly about these principles as we would as an organisation, and how you can work together and kind of come to some, like, I think novelty in the positive sense is kind of key, and like novel approaches. And from a marketing perspective, you know, if an artist wants to come to me and say, you know, we don't want to advertise digitally, but we also don't want to print unnecessary materials, you know, what way can we go about promoting our show or things like that. And I think it's a 360 approach, and it has to come through every single decision you're making, I think. And I don't think it's not without its challenges, but I think having the conversation and trying to put forward kind of the principles that you're striving towards, and just hoping that there can be kind of a dialogue and just working together, because I think collaboration is key, and also new ideas, and artists are the best possible people to be working with in terms of coming up with new approaches and, you know, trying to be as inventive as possible. But also I think there's a real opportunity for artists to kind of come with not stipulations, but like, you know, to come with their specific approach. And because as an organization, as festival, we're working with so many artists, that I'd be really interested in working with artists who, you know, want to work in a venue that doesn't have, you know, that's going to be carbon neutral. So like, it's very difficult to achieve from a marketing perspective, but I'm so interested and open to trying. And I think that that's the only thing that is possible to achieve, is trying and making the effort. Particularly with public funded and with kind of emerging and new artists, I think there is kind of an approach of being prescriptive and trying to do things the way that they are done, because you're kind of striving for professionalism. Whereas I think actually there is an opportunity to do something in a way that it's never been done before, that potentially could be very, very successful in terms of marketing theatre works.
Yeah, definitely. I think just kind of embracing the kind of nature of the work you often make as an emerging artist, or kind of early on in your career, is a great way of making your work more sustainable. And as you say, not just trying to kind of copy what's been done before, but saying like, actually, this is a moment that we need to kind of set a new standard and change how we make things. I'm also intrigued that you mentioned that you worked with like acute art and more kind of technologically minded organizations. Do you feel, is that kind of separate from thinking about climate-based things to you, or has there been any kind of interesting crossover, kind of new ways of thinking about things from that you've seen that could be kind of environmental?
Yeah, I think Freeze Art Fair was quite interesting. I was with them for 4 years, and over the course of that time, international travel is a huge element of what their events are. They happen globally, and kind of, you know, their audience is highly international. And they worked with a UK-based organisation called Julie's Bicycle, who are interesting insofar as they kind of assess your company and your, they do kind of a profile of you in terms of your carbon output. I think with emerging technologies like VR and AR, it's very difficult to tell what the impact and kind of the resource that is required there. And I think those technologies are kind of striving to make themselves dominant, that they're not actually engaging with the implications from a climate perspective, I would say. So there is huge scope there to kind of to engage. But having said that, we worked with the artist O'Halloran and Ceara, who, to your previous question, was who I thought of in terms of the art kind of engaging with climate, because I just found it very interesting. Katie, kind of goes back to you calling yourself a hypocrite, but those kind of contradictions of, you know, a highly successful international artist dealing with climate and the contradictions that exist in that practice. And it was when he had an exhibition at the Tate, and he was previously in 2003, I think he had his Little Sun installation in the Turbine Hall, which just made you think in the intervening years how little had changed in terms of the wider context of climate change and climate action, that the exhibition was tackling the same issues with very little change in the external environment. But there was a conversation that went along with that exhibition opening between the artist O'Halloran, Mary Robinson, in her position as with the EU president of the EU Commission, was it at the time? I can't remember exactly, and a member of Extinction Rebellion. And just generationally, the conversation was very interesting from Mary Robinson's perspective and her approach to climate change and climate action, to the Extinction Rebellion activist who had a wholly different approach. And I just thought that's quite interesting, and that's a challenge that we face in terms of kind of coming together as a community and trying to take action, is there are very different perspectives generationally, and kind of trying to engage all generations, because as younger generations, we need the support and the engagement and the action of older generations also.
Yeah, and I think that's something that's really interesting as we kind of see the climate action and sort of eco-theatre movement grow, is that you realize there are so many different perspectives, and that can be a great thing and it can be a difficult thing, but it's just really interesting to see the different ways people would go about their activism or the different causes you know, people see fighting for as the most important. And I suppose then kind of looking forward, I wanted to ask you all what you kind of see for the future of the sustainability in arts movement, kind of very broadly. I suppose where you feel like it's going and where you hope it might be going in an ideal world. Katie, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah. I suppose this goes back to what Susan was saying about, you know, you can only hold yourself accountable, really. So I think I mean, what hope is that we start to look more closely at green policies that especially larger theaters are putting in place here and globally, and then putting that information up against what tangible change is actually being made, because I think there's a gap there that we need to address. But I think, to me, what's most important is that we do hold ourselves accountable, and whatever kind of space we're in, be that the four of us or anyone listening to this chat, is that you go into new spaces and you just ask, you know, what's being done here in terms of making theatre that's more environmentally conscious or sustainable. I think just to plant that seed and to get that conversation started is a really great step. I know that I've worked with designers who know that I'm interested in creating theater in this way. My show, most of the set was pulled off the sides of country roads, and we just put it up and made it look like a lighthouse. So I think the more that we can start to do that work of just getting the conversations going, and I think too, explaining to people what kinds of theater we want to be making, because it is so diverse. Eco theater doesn't look like the same thing for everybody. So I think showing people too that you're not going to just be seeing shows about, Greta Thunberg or whatever it is. Like there's a lot that we can be tackling. And not to say I don't want to see that play, like someone please produce that play, that would be excellent. But I think showing people that we can still give them great theater that's also environmentally conscious is really the way to go. And also encouraging donors of major theater companies to start asking those questions as well, if that's something that they want to see from the theaters that they're donating to. I think start those conversations. If you're someone that's giving a lot of money to theaters, start asking, what are you doing? I want to see the tangible change.
Yeah, and that's kind of, thinking about the title that we gave the talk today, it's kind of like, yeah, it does seem that fringe artists and smaller artists are kind of answering that call already. And now it's sort of about getting that message out there and getting it to, as you say, to people with more money and more influence, so they can have some real tangible change. Cara, is there anything else that you feel like you'd like to see as we move forward?
Well, I think the COPán Tae chat last week about like circular economy and just the waste that is involved with disposing of sets and costumes, and that's obviously something that really needs to happen. Why isn't it being funded? It's so crucial, and so I would absolutely love to see something like that. But I think it's really important to kind of focus on like the kind of community art side of things, and bring in this kind of awareness to communities who might not, have enough going on as it is, but like to empower people, basically to show them that you do have power. If you show up to a protest or you sign a petition, you go to one march a year, you vote, like it all matters. Like every single little thing that we do matters, and people, I think, forget that. So I think like loads more interactive kind of community art, and then where they can share their own stories and fears and hopes for the future is really important. But yeah, and what Katie said as well, for the big players to come forward and be like, we're going to fund the whole thing. Like the Creative Climate Action Fund is brilliant. That's something like that is like a great step. So more funding like that, and just we'll probably see like climate change just kind of filter into like every new piece, even if it's nothing got to do with climate change. There'll be a couple of lines where they reference something, because it is all around us and it's going to be affecting everyone. So I can see it being just kind of trickled into everything. But I think, there's loads of hopeful things that we can do, and focusing on like solutions and stuff like that is something I would like to see.
Yeah, definitely. And Susan, coming to you, is there any way that you hope the movement's going to develop in the future?
Yeah, similar to your point, Cara, I'd love to see it trickle up. I think we all have a responsibility to ask the person above us, and anyone who holds purse strings has a responsibility. Whether, that's me going to Amazon to buy pens, or, like a sign for a show, or am I going to an Irish supplier, or am I walking out of the office and going to a stationery shop? Whether it's artists who are being funded by an organisation or by a public body of, asking the question, or, you know, going to a venue, you have to take your stance to the people who are kind of the next up the chain, I think, because that's the only way. And, you know, it always feels like you don't personally have the power, but collaboratively, and, you know, through community, like we were speaking about, we start to build power, and through those networks. And so I think we just need to kind of use collaboration and our own individual power to just ask the question, and in our own practice, whether it's artistic or whether it's our professional, in our professional capacities, to start making those actions, but also asking the questions, and really holding people to account. And those actions can be as small or as major as are within your capacity.
Yeah, absolutely. And not to kind of, obviously it can be a challenge at times to kind of ask people above you if they thought about those things and would they consider doing those things. But I think you're right, it can be a really rewarding thing. You know, I know in my experience, I've asked people on productions I've worked on, like, oh, have you thought about doing it like this, or are we going to take this into account? And so often people will like accept the invitation and be really excited by it. So yeah, I think you're right. I really would love to see more of that.
I think convenience is the reason why the answer would be no, because I don't think anyone outright would disagree with it. So I think coming with the question and the solution, or at least an idea of a solution, is the best way forward.
Yeah, that's really good advice, definitely. Yeah, so unless we have any other questions from Facebook or any other last pearls of wisdom any of you would like to share, I think that's us. But thank you so much to all of you for joining us. We do have one more COPán Tae installment on this Wednesday at 1 p.m. as well, so please do return for that. But thank you so much, Susan, Katie and Cara. It was amazing to hear all of your thoughts and hear about your experience. And yeah, thank you so much.